All right, everyone. Welcome. My name is Marcus King, architect, urban designer, and small scale developer. And in this tutorial, I'm going to teach you the basics of on how to put together a really simple, really quick site plan for your projects. And this site plan can be used to understand your parcel, understand your site, and understand how zoning applies to that site. But also it can be used to create sketch ideas that, depending on the scale and intensity of the project, can be used for future documents, including a bank package and things of the like. So, without further ado, let's get into it. So, what you're looking at now is essentially our abstract for this project. So, it's a case study example of some zoning regulations that we're going to be using for this project. But before we get into that, I want to talk about really quickly some of the tools that I use to, and some of the tools that you guys are going to use to create these site plans. So, first and foremost, for those of you that are not architecturally inclined and do not have fancy architecture tools, that's fine. You don't need it. I think this is a tool that everybody has. Just regular white paper. Paper that you can pull from your printer. You can buy it at Office Max. This is nothing intense, right? So just regular white paper will be good to sort of create your sketches and create your diagrams, your drawings on. You can use that for. I also use it for note taking as well, just sort of like side notes. And then something that I think every developer, even if you're not an architect or trained as an architect, should have is a scale. What I'm showing you here is an architect scale. I'm not sure if you can see the increments here, but it typically ranges as small as a 16th or I think it's 16th, 3/32, and then they go up to a half inch per foot, 3 inches per foot, and we'll talk a little bit more about how the scale works once we get into the tutorial. So that's extremely helpful. And then one thing you may be interested in is getting a parallel glider slide. So this is just used to help keep your lines straight and parallel. Straight and parallel as you're trying to create your drawing. So you make sure something is straight here, and you simply just slide it over to make sure you get that same angle of the line, right? So I'm not trying to be perfect, but we're trying to draw it as close to scale as possible to represent the drawing and the configuration that you're trying to show. And then I use an assortment of pens and pencils. I use ink. Some of you may be more comfortable with pencil. That's fine too. When I'm using ink, though, I use a different variety of thicknesses. So I have a thin black pen, which I use for just kind of drawing things, roughing things out. Some of you may be more comfortable with pencil. That's fine. Then a medium tip, a felt tip. This is sort of like my general pen that I use. And then a thicker black marker, which I use to sort of outline buildings. And then I use a red marker for like special lines and things like that. So I think those are some of your basic instruments. And then, if you're really so inclined and you have, you sort of at an art store and you find them, I find that these drafting dots are really helpful to keep the paper down when you're sort of sketching over it. And I'll show you why these are important. And I'll show you right now, actually. And so your last tool, primary tool, is going to be this thing that some people call onion skin, like myself. Others call it sketch paper. But essentially, it's just a transparent paper, trash paper. Others call it as well. But it's to help you overlay. So once you create sort of these concrete measurements for your parcel, you can take the sketch paper, trash paper, onion paper, overlay it over the top of that drawing and begin to sketch in different interventions, sketch in different ideas until you find the one that you want to go with. This is extremely helpful and something that I use on a daily basis. And I think something that, again, not even if you're an architect, but if you're a developer, you're doing this work in the built environment, trash paper, onion skin paper, something that you should always have next to your desk. And then if you're feeling artistic and creative, and if there's time, I'll show a little rendering. But you know, I always keep some colored pencils, markers next to me just to kind of show some animation to the drawing once I finalize it. And again, if we have some time at the end, I'll show how to use that. So without further ado, let's get into the actual exercise here. So I'm going to try to make some space. And actually, before we do that, let's go over these really quickly. So again, this is a case study example of some basic zoning regulations that you would find in city, small town, city, USA, and indeed some larger urban areas as well. So what do we have here? So we have a parcel size that is 5,000 square feet, so 50 feet wide by 100 feet deep. Has alley access in the back, as well as a public right-of-way main street in the front, or primary street in the front. So it's a mid-block parcel, not a corner lot. And this particular zone, we're going to call it R4. And so within this hypothetical zone, you are allowed to do up to 4 apartments max, so 4 units. You are required to do a 20-foot front setback, a 30-foot rear setback, and a 10-foot side setback on both sides. Setbacks are essentially easements on a property that you cannot build on, a developer cannot build on. That's usually for a myriad of reasons, primarily to get utilities in and to allow them to be easily accessible to the public utility that's underground, that's serving that building. That's usually why they're built. There's other reasons as well, which I won't get into here. Some other regulations, we have a 30% lot coverage. Lot coverage means that only 30% of your entire parcel, so in this case 5,000 square feet, can be built on. Usually this is different than what you're allowed to build on after you take away your setback dimensions. Sometimes they align, sometimes they don't. So you have to go through the exercise of totaling up what each of those is to make sure what's the regulating factor there. You have an FAR of 0.7, meaning that your total building cannot exceed more than 0.7, a factor of 0.7 of the entire 5,000 square foot parcel. And then finally, parking. So we are required to do 1.5 parking spaces per residential unit that we plan to develop on this site. So these are the constraints that we're going to be going by as we develop our site plan. So I'm going to set this to the side and I'm going to set us up here. So first thing you want to do is take your paper and, kind of set it equally in the screen. And then if you have it, again, it's not required, but if you have it, I find it being helpful for me because I like to slide all over the place. I just kind of tape it down. Put one in the corner, or in the middle on one side, and then you take a dot, do the same thing on the other side. That way, your main drawing surface is stationary, right? It's not going to move. And then the first thing I do, I'm trying to get organized here, is I take my thin pen, or my light pen, and we're going to begin the process of laying out the dimensions of our parcel. Okay, so the first thing you want to do is pick a good scale. If you're using an architectural scale, smaller is better, especially at this sort of level of development. So I think that developing something at an 1/8 inch or 3/8 of an inch would be a sufficient scale to develop at. So let's kind of measure it out here, right? So let me see if I can show you this. So if you look at that, you'll see that says 1/8 of an inch, right? So that means each of these are 1/8 increments, and this is 1/8 inch equals a foot. So each one of these 1/8 inch increments in real space on the ruler represents 1 foot on paper space. right? So that's what that means when we say there's an eighth of an inch to a foot, you know. Same thing with this one here. This is 3/32. So each of these are 3/32 of an increment, and each of those increments equals 1 foot. It's a smaller scale. Okay? So you want to find the scale that A, fits on the paper, and then B, allows you to sort of draw the ideas that you're trying to draw. And so I think going with an 1/8 inch scale is going to be slightly too big. So that means I'm going to go to a smaller scale, and probably the 1/16 is going to be better. Yeah. So let's set it up here. So this is going to be my 0 mark, and then I have a 100-foot deep parcel. All right, so that's 10. That's 100 feet. Okay. So I have my long dimension. Now I have to establish what my my width, my wide dimension is, right? Before I do that, I'm just going to take my straight edge, establish what that boundary is. Now I'm just going to do a light line for now. Slide it over just like that. Do another light line for now. Okay, so that's the deepness of my parcel. Now I need to establish the width. So again, taking a 1/16 of an inch scale, and that's 10 feet, 20, 30, 40, 50. So I'm trying to center it in the space on the sheet here. So that's 50. So that's going to establish my width. I take my little sliding ruler here, try to make sure it's parallel, just drag it down, and then just do a little light line there. Again, you can do this with a pencil if you feel more comfortable doing that. That's fine. Bam. All right, so what I like to do is I like to highlight my setback lines and my property lines in red, just to make them stand out. You know, so I'll do something like that. And I'm just using the typical property line designation that us architects use. And then again, I'm doing this freehand, but if you feel more comfortable doing it with your straight edge or your ruler, by all means do that. Just gonna do this here. Boom, 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 boom. Yeah, okay, that's my parcel. Now, so we're taking care of our site. We have our parcel, 50 by 100. So now what we're going to do is establish our setbacks to figure out what area, what segment, what region of our parcel is actually going to be buildable based on these setbacks, these side, rear, and front setbacks. All right, so let's establish the front first, right? 20 feet from the front, okay? So we are going to, again, same scale, 1/16 of an inch. And actually, let me mark it here so that everybody can see. I think that's right. Forgive me as I'm writing upside down. So this will be our front, this will be our rear. So we'll take our 1/16 inch scale. We go 20 feet in. That's 20 feet. We have a side, a rear setback of 30 feet from the rear. So we 20, 10, 20, 30 right there. And then we have side setbacks of 10 feet each on each side. So that's 10 feet there. And we come down here and we do another 10 feet. All right. That's our side setbacks. So now that we've established our lines, we once again take our sliding rule here, and I'm gonna skip the the light line step, please by all means do it yourself if that makes you feel more comfortable. But for the sake of this tutorial, I'm just going to skip that step so we can get to the good stuff. So draw my 20-foot line here in the front. That's my front setback, 20 feet. And then try to play by the rules here. Then this is my 30-foot from the rear setback, from the rear lot line. So I'll just dash that in. And then now let's do the side. So that's my 10-foot mark there. I'm gonna sort of line myself up, drag it down. Bam. There you go. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the other side setback. Line myself up, slide it upward, and then that's my 10-foot mark all the way across. Okay. So those are our setback lines. That's our property line. And what I like to do, just to remind myself, is and you guys can do this as well, is actually put in what these are. I think that's helpful. So that's 10 feet, 10 feet. This here is, let me put it down here. Okay. So I'm gonna get my elbow in here. Let me start here. So this is 30 feet there. And again, please forgive me because I'm writing upside down. And that's 20 feet. So 30-foot setback, 20, 10, 10. That means, and I'm going to cheat a little bit because I did not introduce the coveted green pencil to pen to you guys, but I'm going to pull it out the repertoire here just for the purpose of this exercise. That means that once we establish our setbacks, this is the only area per the zoning code for this parcel that is buildable. And this is what we call buildable area. Only this on the entire parcel. That is where any covering can go. I'm just gonna throw that right. So, in most cases, this would essentially establish where you can place your building and how much of that parcel you can build on. If you remember, there's another metric here, the lot occupancy, that also dictates how much you can cover on your lot, in addition to defining what those setbacks is. So for the ease of this exercise, I actually made the lot coverage equal to what this area would be after you establish the setback. So this is roughly a 50 by 30 buildable area, which comes out to 1,500 square feet, which is what 30% of 5,000 square foot parcel is. So in this case, it's simple. Both of the numbers are the same, but in many cases they aren't, right? So you have to make sure you do both metrics to make sure that you're getting what the accurate buildable area is. So that's for simplicity purposes. So so that establishes the parcel. Now we can move on to figuring out how the building and the site sort of lays out. Before we move on, one thing to note here is that in the rear yard, even though you can't build on it, they do allow, most zoning codes allow you to do two things, actually three things. So service, and remember for this particular example, let me try to write it this way. This is an alley here in this case. And this is your front street. Right, so this is a public alley, which allows you to access the rear of the parcel. So what can happen in the rear yard are three significant things. One, that's usually where parking is allowed. A second thing that usually happens if you have an alley especially is a service. So what are service? Again, things like your recycling disposal, trash disposal. Usually a lot of your utilities are coming in off the alley as well. That's what we call service. And then accessory structures are the last thing that are allowed to happen in your rear yard. So you have your main primary structure. This is where your primary use is going to be. In this case, it's an apartment building. But your accessory structure, things like a garage or a shed or some sort, when we're talking about a residential use, that is allowed to go in the rear yard. And then usually in the front yard, you get an encroachment of some sort of, for a porch or things like that. Usually it's anywhere from 6 to 10 feet, depending on what city you live in. But those are the only things that are allowed in the public, in the easement area or in the setback area. The primary building has to fall within this line, within this 1,500 square foot area. Okay, so let's remember that as we get into our exercise. So now that we've got our chassis here, the framework of our parcel, now we can start to go in and figure out, based on the zoning code, how this thing lays out. And this is why our trace paper, that's what I call it trace paper. That's why our trace paper is so valuable here, because it allows us to create as many of these different versions as we want. And again, because I like to get a little crazy, and I don't like my paper sliding all over the place, I just kind of tape it down so that it stays stationary, and I got a nice, firm, consistent working surface. So same tools apply, same scale applies. All right, still at a 1/16 of an inch per foot. So let's revisit our mandates here, right? So we've got we have the ability to build up to 4 apartments, right? And for the purpose of this exercise, we're just gonna, sort of draw in a building, what the potential building footprint could be for 4 units. Another thing, the other primary thing that's gonna play out here is the parking, which will be interesting to kind of figure out. So let's begin to lay it out. So we've already got our chassis here. I'm just going to reestablish with my big fat marker here, the boundaries of our parcel, our 50 by 100 foot parcel. That's the overlay. This is probably a little bit too thick. I probably should have used my medium marker for this, but we'll do another one. Okay. So I know this is my buildable area. I'm just going to, again, and actually let me do this so you guys can see how this works. So I'm going to take my thinner pen and I'm just going to outline the area where the building is allowed to go. Yeah, I probably should use my thicker pen for this one. That's okay. All right, that's my building. Simple as that. You can. I kind of like to fancy it up a little bit. Make some thicker edges to kind of give it some heft to it, some presence on the page. Again, this is just me being a fancy architect. Don't mind me. And this is roughly 1,500 square feet. Now, we're gonna do. I'm gonna try to turn my back here. Let's see, 4. That's a terrible 4. Horrible. 4 units. Okay. That's horrible. That's absolutely horrible. But you get the idea. So 4 units. Should have just put 4. This is a 4-unit apartment building. So the next thing we want to lay out is parking, because that's going to take up, second to the building, that's going to take up most of the space, and usually is something that a lot of zoning administrators are looking for. So our code in this mythical place requires us to do 1.5 spaces per apartment building, and we've got a 4-unit apartment building. Okay, that would mean if we do 4 times 1.5, right, let's just do that math. 1.5. That would be 6 spaces. Okay, so the metrics for a parking space, they vary a little bit depending on what city you live in, but I think a good metric to sort of stick with is, I'll just write it this way and then I'll turn it around. So we do a 20-foot, and I think anywhere between, you'll see anywhere from 8 to 10. I like to go with, an 8-foot wide parking bay, just because I'm an urbanist and I'd rather give my space to people rather than cars. But I think using anywhere from an 8 or 9 foot wide parking space and usually anywhere from 18 to 20 feet deep is a good metric to use to represent a parking space. And then now we can replay that on our sketch here to lay out the parking spaces. So let's do that right now. So we know we need 6 spaces. We've got a 50-foot lot here to deal with. And remember, we also have to get our trash out of here in the rear as well too. So let's just see how this works out. Okay, so I typically set back a little bit from, especially when I have the ability to, I set back a little bit from, excuse me, the alley before I start to define my parking space. Even you don't have to, but I just like that because I have the space here. So I'm gonna go in 5 feet. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's my 5-foot mark, and then from there, I'll jump up and do 20 feet. 20 feet. Okay. So draw myself a little light line, and then I have plenty of space here for a walk to lead into my building, right? And that's critical, especially if you're doing anything over 2 units. You need a pathway that's ADA accessible, not only ADA accessible, but also fair housing accessible to get into the building for multifamily, what's considered multifamily buildings. That's neither here nor there. Let's stay on task here. So we've got our typical 20-foot deep parking space measurement, just here. Mark that line, and then we're going to go with 8-foot wide increments for our parking space. And again, I'm going to leave about 5 feet on the side here, just so I can get an alleyway back here and get my trash out, etc., etc. So from there, we're going to just mark off these 8-foot increments. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Bam. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I'll make sure I did this right. Okay. 8. 8. 8. And then it looks like I can get more. So measure it out. It's 1. It's 2. 3. 4. And 5. So what you'll see is we're actually short. We're actually short of space. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then again, this is going to be our walkway, so we get our trash out. Those are trash bins. So what this means is that 2 things. Two things are true. One thing, we cannot develop this project with 4 units because we can't get that 6th spot. What is also true, and it just depends on where you are, where your city, how your city interprets this or what they allow, you may be able to get a variance. That variance will excuse you from either having to do that one parking spot altogether, or they may allow you to use an on-street parking space to count toward that space. So that just depends. But we're going to go with a by right situation here, and what I'm going to say is that by right, we can't develop this project because we don't have enough space here to do parking. You can try other configurations. They most likely won't work. You could try to do something this way, but then that takes into the space for your building, right? We got to cut that up in half so that we can maybe run the spaces that way. I don't think that works. I'm pretty sure that doesn't work as well. Just not a good use of space. So that was our first pass. So we're going to do a final pass here, which is going to be the one we're going to sort of canonize for this exercise. I just wanted to go through that just to show you a little bit of the iterative process that a lot of developers and architects go through to sort of figure out, what that best use for the parcel is, and what they can develop on a parcel. Again, these are just rough sketches. They're not meant to be pretty, although you can make them look pretty. But that's not the intent. The intent is to communicate an idea and to help you as a developer understand what your entitlement potential is. So let's try this one more time, and then I'm gonna try not to mess up here this time. And this time I'm gonna do a duplex. I'm gonna do a simple 2-unit duplex. Okay, so I'm gonna try my medium-sized marker here to establish my parcel. Bam, 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 bam. That's my boundary. I'm gonna come down here on this side. Come down here on that side. Okay, so still have to stay within my parcel here, but I'm going to shrink my building a little bit because I'm only doing a duplex, and I'm gonna say this is gonna be a 20 foot wide building. All right, so I'm gonna just place it here within my sort of magic box here. All right, so I've got a 20 foot wide building. And I don't need it to be 50 feet wide. I think I could go with, something like 40. Okay. So I'll take my parallel bar, and then I'll do the front. And I'll do the other side. Stop right there because that's my mark. And that's my new building footprint. That's my duplex. It could be a side by side. It could be 1/1, but this is a pretty big footprint for a 1/1. But again, it's just an exercise to communicate this idea, how this works. So I'm going to say it's a side-by-side duplex. I'll show you why that matters in a minute. That's my building footprint. I'm staying within my magic box here, right? See that? My magic box. So now, per our zoning code, which states that we need 1.5 spaces per unit, I only need three parking spaces now, and not 6. All right, so go through the same process we did last time, and I'm going to try to stay off to one side here. So let's stay here. Actually, let's do this. I'm gonna use my side setback line here as a set aside for how I'm gonna get to my trash lane here. So I'm gonna start here. And we got just use 9 this time. 3. Yeah, so 9, 9, 9. 9-foot increments from that line. And we need to be 20 feet deep. And I like to set it up just a little bit further. So 1, 2, set it up 2 feet or 3 feet further. That's 20 feet. Okay. So I'll take my little parallel bar. It's the line. Excuse me. I'll hold it to that to make sure it's parallel, and then just draw your line across. And then we stop here. And there you go. And then you can just put in all the additional stall lines there. Okay. And then I like to do a little embellishment. Universal symbol for parked cars. I don't know if that's true, but this was how I was taught, so I just continue the tradition. You don't have to do this, but it kind of helps me understand like what these lines are. Okay, so that's that. And then once we got our parking, so we got our parking by right for our building. What we want to do next is, I think, establish our trash and refuse. So how are we going to get trash, out of the building to a service area for a service truck to come pick up? So let's make it this area actually instead of this area. Let's make it here. So again, I'm gonna rough it because I know these bins are roughly square, rectangular, especially for a small building this size. So it's probably even too big, but trash. And then we'll do, that's recycling or reusables, things like that. And then what you want to do now is sort of establish this, how one gets from the building to this area. And this is where you can kind of freehand it. You're allowed to use all this area for surface stuff, for paths and things like that, permeable area, grass area. As long as there's no building on these setback areas, you're good, right? So, I've got 2 units here. Let's just say this is my party line between those 2 units, shotgun units. We've got an entrance up here. We've got a rear exit here, rear exit for that one, front entrance for that one as well. So what I'm going to do is just kind of sketch in here a little walk. That's a little too big. Let's shrink it up a little bit. Okay, and I'm going to use my ruler here instead of that. And then I'm going to come out of my apartment there. Bam. Bam. And again, this is where it gets easier because all of your hard regulated things are already put into place. All right. All that stuff is done. And all we have to do, let's just keep it like that. All we have to do is just figure out how this whole thing works. I'm gonna stop it here. And then just to make sure it fits. So we'll draw that. And again, remember you can use pencil for this. That doesn't matter. And I'm gonna try to be as generic as possible. And we'll keep that this way. And you know, I want to make, you know, some sidewalks or some side paths here. So I'm actually going to come in and maybe I take my line here just to keep it outside the setback. Don't have to, but the line's there, so I'm going to use it. Again, this is the fun part. I'm just sort of playing with how things work, all right? And again, remember that front setback, usually the zoning codes allow you to encroach a little bit for a porch of some sort, you know, so I'm just gonna rough in a little canopy for each of these units here. And then this walk is gonna come around. I'm gonna try to speed up a little bit just because I think I'm running out of time here, and I don't want to keep you all too long, but I want you to get the sense of, you know, what a final one of these bad boys looks like. All right, and then that, you know, maybe there's a couple of steps there, and then that comes across and meets that one. Again, you got a couple of steps there. And just having fun. Ooh, that was a bad line. Maybe I should keep using my ruler. My scale, rather. Yeah, that was a horrible line. And then I'm going to do the same thing on this side. One thing to remember, though, you know, you're doing all this extra pathway stuff. There are other regulations in zoning codes that somewhat regulate this. You know, there's usually limits on, you know, permeable area or impervious area. So be aware of that. Yeah, so I think that sort of makes the site plan work. And what I screwed up on last time, but I did not this time, was I usually save my thick marker for the building outline, just so it pops on the page. And people know this is the building, you know. Bam. And then the last thing you want to do, again, this is one of those things that depends on where you are in the world, but you know, sometimes the sidewalk is right at the right-of-way line, sometimes it's not, usually so, but let's just shadow that in. So that's our sidewalk, and that's going to go down to the street. Go walk and see your neighbors. Hopefully my hands are not in your way. And then maybe you got another little berm here. And then your curb. This is your street. Okay. And so these paths meet up in the sidewalk. Like I'm sure you guys are already familiar with. Okay, so sidewalk. These are paths. Everything's connected. So let me just hash this in real quick. It's horrible. And I'm going to sort of get in your way just so I can make sure this looks right. Unit 2. Unit 1, Unit 2. Okay. So now what you guys can do, if you want to get fancy, is take your little colored pencils and create a little bit of animation. So I usually take a little beige or earth tone colored marker and just gonna hatch in my path. These are walking paths. connected. These are the paths that people are going to use. Residents, occupants of the site are going to use to service the site, access the buildings, get the trash out, access the cars, etc., etc. Porch 1, porch 2. Let's just finish this side here. And again, these paths can take on multiple configurations. This I just did it this way for the purpose of this exercise, and quite frankly, it's probably not the way I would have done it for a real project, but I think you guys get the point, which is the intent of this tutorial. Okay. So now we got our paths in, and I'm gonna find another color. Hopefully I have a green in here. Yes, I do. And it is already, excuse me, sharpened, which is great. Sometimes it's not. And then you come back in and you do the same thing with your grass. You know, this is going to be grass. Again, some of you may want to have side doors. You can try different configurations of your site plan. You know, if you had a third unit, you can go back to the fourth unit. And, you know, as a developer, you know, knowing that physically you can't get that, you know, you can't get something to work on a parcel that is required, as a developer, knowing that earlier, sooner rather than later, is a game changer, because that allows you to strategize about the parcel and whether or not you in fact do want to go for a variance of some sort. Which is additional funds. For those of you just starting out in small scale or incremental development, we usually advise against that. We usually advise to go with the lowest risk type of project, which is usually not one that's going to require variance. But you know, it's a free country, right? We're going to do our final side here. Get our grass. Apologize for the soundtrack of the rattling table in the back. All right, so it doesn't have to be perfect, but again, you guys get the idea. We got a lawn here in the front. That's that. And then I usually do, if I have a black marker, it's like a gray. From the parking, I usually service, as you can't see that. Here, I'll do this. Usually for the parking, I'll either leave it white, like I'm going to do in this particular example, or I'll hatch in the parking area in gray. I'm planning service spaces, service buildings are usually hatched or rendered in a gray tone, gray color. Okay. All right. Actually, let me just do this really quick. So that makes sense. You can see a sidewalk. There you go. So yeah, that's really the gist of it, right? You've got all your primary elements, and they all fit within the regulations that apply to this particular parcel, which is really what you want when you're doing a rough site plan like this. You're just trying to understand how your entitlement and entitlement law applies to your particular site, so that you can strategize about your project. Just differentiate that. This is your trash. What's happened is your trash truck's going to come to your alley. It's going to stop here. It's going to get out. It's going to take your trash and your recycling, put it in the truck, and keep going, right? And all that happens in the back, away from the beautiful front facade that you're going to develop when you get to that point. And the same thing with your cars. You come in the alley, pull in, park your car, you walk right into your unit, right? And then you can do a canopy if you want to do that. Maybe you don't want your cars exposed to the elements, and we can just do a little carport shed, if you will. You don't want to do that, that's fine. And then maybe you want to do a little bit more planting, right? So we could, and again, this is again the fun part, right? So we can do some little bushes here, some bushes here. Just kind of add some elements here. Maybe there's a tree. Just at this point, you know, just really just kind of have a little fun with it. Yeah, you got a tree here, tree there. Maybe you want a few down the side. And I'm just randomly doing this just to prove a point, show an example, but maybe these are just some random bushes, things of the sort. And then what I usually do is just come back and, you know, kind of darken it up a little bit so the trees pop. Again, this is just fancy architect stuff, so not necessary. But if you hire somebody like myself, a person like me in your area, they will most likely zhuzh it up for you. You know, so it looks like you know what you're doing, but you will have already done this process, so you know what to look for. All right, which is the point. El punto. All right, I'm gonna hurry up with this so I can end it. And I'm gonna pull my own underlay so you guys can see what this looks like after the fact, or once we're done, right? So yeah, after that, you just sort of have fun with it. You know, kind of play with some embellishments that you want to show. Maybe placement of trees, placement of bushes, like that. You probably want to put an enclosure around this, you know, so people don't see the trash. And again, you can use your ruler if that makes you feel more comfortable. You know, at this point in my career, I just kind of, you know, make it do what it do. And if you want to give it another technique that I use to kind of give the grass a little bit more texture, just use like a little dotting technique. Again, not necessary, but when you're compulsive like myself, you can't help yourself. Okay, so continue with that. So let's untape this, and then I will remove our little underlay here. And we are left with a pretty decent site plan of a duplex on a 50 by 100 foot parcel. There you go. All right. So really simple. So again, you know, take some time if you're looking at projects, if you're trying to understand a parcel before you buy it. This is a great exercise to do because it helps you visualize and understand. Excuse me. Again, what those ramifications are for your parcel, how a zoning law ordinance in your city, your town, your municipality is going to regulate what you can do on a parcel. And doing sketches like this, even before you even purchase that parcel, are very helpful in guiding your strategy and figuring out what your yields are. And if you're doing this in tandem with a pro forma, you'll be able to work with the financial side as well as the aesthetic and the zoning and the urban side, working both at the same time to sort of create the origin chassis of that project. So I hope this was helpful. I hope you guys learned a little bit about what we do as architects, and hopefully this is something that you guys can apply to your current projects or your future projects, and help you understand how zoning applies to your parcels, and more importantly, provide you with some initial drawings that you can present to investors and communicate your ideas. and raise funds for your wonderful projects in your neighborhood. So thank you for taking the time to listen to this tutorial. Hopefully it was helpful. Happy developing.